And all those things, they formed me.
Yeah.
And what I've seen is if we're not careful, we got guys who are highly gifted and very educated, which are great things, and they have very little experience. I think a telling question for us, and I think something we need to be honest about, is asking this question to people, guys that are wanting to plant a church. Is there someone in your life right now, or that you can give an example of, a lost, not a non-believing person that you have a deep, meaningful relationship with, that you are actively pursuing to make a disciple of them?
Family, multiplication, restoration. I'm Dahadi Lewis. Join me, Noah Oldham and Hayden Radner, as we come to you from Atlanta, St. Louis, and Las Vegas, as we seek to add value to your church planting journey. We'll have real-time, authentic conversations that are relevant to the life of the church planter and pastor. Join us as we hear from leaders of this movement from across North America and discover what it really takes to plant churches everywhere for everyone.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the We Are Send Network podcast. My name is Noah Oldham, lead pastor of August Gate in St. Louis, joined as always by Hayden Ratner, senior pastor of Walk Church in Las Vegas, Nevada. Hey. Dahadi is out today, but we have a very special guest all the way from Boston, the Boston area.
Yep.
Aaron Cavin. Aaron, it's good to have you today, brother.
Thanks, man. Great to be here.
Thanks for having me. You gotta say with an A, Baston.
Baston. Man, so we want to just begin. We Are Send Network. We want our listeners to know who you are, what you're doing, and a little bit of how God got you there.
Yeah, so for me, I planted Life Community Church in 2008. So I was 29 years old. My wife and I, we just had the two boys at the time, moved there. I was a youth pastor in Ohio prior to that, and set up shop in Quincy, which is just south of Boston. So it's the fourth largest city in the Boston metro area.
Nice.
Very transient, very connected to the community, a lot of commuters there.
Yeah.
And so we moved there in 2007, planted in 2008. And so this September will be 13 years.
Wow.
Since we planted, which is, God's been really good. So, it's been a journey over the last few years for us to kind of discover who we are. Obviously, when you plant, you kind of taking everybody else's model and plug and play and try to make that work. But over time for us, probably about by year 5, by year 5, we were to a point where we really felt like God was calling us to make a transition from what we kind of perceived as a bit more attractional to a bit more missional.
Okay.
So, we had really kind of started out to the best of our ability, launch large, try to do some marketing as much as we can, very little budget. And we didn't launch large, we launched about 30 people. So large was out the window. But what happened is that kind of just steadily grew over a few years. Those first few years, we were never more than 50 people. Wow. Revolving door of 50 different people.
Wow.
Every Sunday. And so I was working jobs on the side, just trying to keep my family above water and try to keep the church moving forward. But by year 5, we definitely had hit some traction. Between year 3 and 5, we'd grown to a couple hundred people. We started to really connect with our city. We were there long enough where they felt we had longevity, and we were connecting with our community. They didn't see us as kind of like the outsiders moving in anymore. We were kind of this staple in our community, the way we'd served and loved them for the last 5 years. But as the church began to grow, one of the questions that we asked ourselves was, if it looked like at that time, things are going to start to take off. And the question we kept asking ourselves was, if we grew to be 1,000 people, which in New England would be a large church,
sure,
right? I'd probably get interviewed, right? Right? Like they would probably be interested in knowing more about our story.
That's why we got you on the podcast.
Right? Yeah. Right. But if we grew to be 1,000 people, but nobody in our church had to know their neighbor, is that something that I could give my life to?
Wow.
Jeez.
And so we really made a hard shift there. I read a book, Total Church, Tim Chester, Steve Timmis,
Nice.
Really talking about the difference between, are we going to spend all of our time, energy, and creativity in trying to grow one large congregation, or are we going to start smaller congregations? Yeah. And that changed the trajectory of our ministry, and it's shaped who we are even to this day. And so we really made a shift where we said, let's not plant a church 50 minutes away or a campus on the North Shore of Boston. Let's start a parish 5 minutes away. Let's see if we can put a parish, a local expression of Life Community in each of these surrounding towns and communities around us. They're local, they're nimble, they're contextual, they can meet the needs of that community and begin to live out the mission that God's called us to. And so that's what we've been working toward as a church in the greater Boston area for over 10 years now.
Wow.
So we started our second parish 4 years ago in Braintree, the next town over. We're starting our third parish in Weymouth. the next town over in next Easter. And what's really cool is
Amazing.
We have our fourth planter, which will be our very first indigenous student that we led to Christ, discipled, and are sending out.
Yes.
So we're
Amazing.
at a tipping point where we're shifting from planting churches for New Englanders to planting churches with New Englanders.
Wow.
And so that's what we're really excited about, is just to see that kind of perpetuate over and over and over and over again.
Man, I love that.
Yeah, I think that'd be cool to even just talk through. A lot of people listening to this, including myself, I'm listening in right now, real time, are thinking about how to discover, how to develop, how to deploy from within, how to or people coming in either way.
Yeah.
But the goal would be from within to send out church planters. You're seeing some traction. You're not just talking theory right here. You're talking about real life.
Yeah.
What are some of the systems you're putting in place? I've talked with you a little bit just outside of this moment about tracks or internships, things like that. Maybe some handlebars that we could kind of peek into Life Community as to what you guys are doing.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things we did is, once we decided, hey, we want to start smaller congregations, what we realized was we need church planters.
Yeah.
Right. So we need guys, and it's not a true campus. We're more on the multi-church side of things than multi-site. So these are parishes that have their own lead pastor, they've got their own elders, they operate off their own budget.
Yeah.
So we really wanted to develop strong leaders, and so our first shot out of the gate was, how do we just identify a couple guys we think would be good church planters?
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
And then we started the training with them, and we got about a few months in and realized the training we were using wasn't super great. We really were kind of almost got the cart before the horse, because what we realized was we were trying to find church planters. And really, Paul writes to Titus, says, hey, I'm leaving you behind to finish the work that I've started.
Right.
And that's going to require you to raise up elders in each of the towns and communities around you. Mm-hmm. And so we thought, wait a minute, let's focus on raising up really good elders. Mm-hmm. Let's get really good elders, and some of those elders will make really good church planters.
Wow.
So the second year we did it, we invited people in who could identify a calling to eldership. So if you feel like God's called you to eldership, you've been a member at good standing at our church for the last year, we want to invite you into this process to explore that. Mm-hmm. And so we built out this pastoral track. At the time we called it an elder track. And, we just went systematically, went through Alexander Strauss's book, Biblical Eldership, Bob Thune, Gospel-Centered Eldership, as well as a bunch of other resources that we used.
Yeah.
So it ended up being a really cool thing. And yet we felt like, we're still not getting people early enough.
Yeah.
And what we realized was we had guys in our church that they would never identify a call to eldership, because, these are guys that had gotten saved maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years ago, and God was doing amazing things in their lives, but in their mind, they could never do what I do.
Yeah.
And so what we said was, hey, we changed it. So the third year we did it, we changed it again and said, this year we're going to do it as a pastoral track. Mm-hmm. If you're interested at all in pastoral ministry, and we even opened it up, you don't even have to be a member. We went so far as to say, because what I know is if you go through this track, you're probably going to be a member by the end of it. Yeah. So it's also going to be a form of assimilation. But more importantly, it's like, if you're interested in pastoral ministry, we feel it's a worthy investment of our time to spend a year developing you and teaching you what it looks like to do pastoral ministry. And so we had 5 guys go through that 2 years ago, or I guess rather last year. And it was a really cool mix, because I had a couple residents who, a couple guys that were out of seminary that had moved here. One of those guys is going to take the lead on our plant in Weymouth. And then it was these other couple guys that had gotten saved in our church.
Wow.
Right.
And
mix.
So that mix was phenomenal, because what was cool was these guys had theological training, but these guys didn't know anything but mission.
Yep.
And so for those guys to get together and see that kind of shape and form.
Awesome.
Book of Acts.
Yeah, dude. So through that process, Derek Mosick identified, man, I not only feel called to eldership, I feel called to church planting. Mm-hmm. And so this guy, he had a needle in his arm 3 years ago, 8th grade education. This guy, but what God has done in his life is phenomenal. So here's what's really cool is Noah, who's going to be our planter in Weymouth, who has a seminary degree from New Orleans, they're in this track together. He's going to be planting in Weymouth. They connect, and Derek, who's been saved for 3 years, decides to break his lease, buy a house in Weymouth to help Noah start this church. And so now the next 2 years of his growth plan in preparation for planting, he'll do that with Noah.
Gosh.
And just perpetuate. And so now this year we got 3 more guys. And so at some point what we had to decide was, we had to slow down enough to just take the time to start to develop people.
Yeah.
But now that I'm 5 years into it, now we're starting to see a pool of guys, and I'm going, by God's grace, if we continue this process, I'll never have to ask where my next planter is coming from.
Come on.
You got it.
So that's what the goal is for us. And so it's been such a journey for us. And so now what we're saying is, all right, I think could even go a little earlier, a little further back, which is, what if we created a track just around missional engagement? So before you jump to pastoral ministry, would you like to be more involved in missional engagement, the art of neighboring, gospeling your community, learning what it looks like to engage and make a disciple?
Yeah.
And so that would be kind of the first process, and then pastoral track. And by that time, maybe they spend a year or so on a growth plan from us. Well, by the time those guys go to assessment, man,
Gosh,
they're ready to go. So the only thing next for them is a residency to answer the question, what are my next steps to get this church off the ground?
I'm sitting there taking notes because it's really affirming, because in our church, we developed a plan for ourselves too. We said, hey, we want to answer that same question. Where's our next planter coming from? Yep. From within, we've got to develop this, but we're not going to overnight have planters.
Correct.
And so we said we have three parts of ours. We have the leader track.
Yep.
And this last year we had over 40 men and women in that, because we say covenant membership is the first level of leadership.
Yep.
But then people who want to own another level. So our leader track, and then some qualified men who say are qualifying men, we say that want to be in our pastor track.
Great.
We'll go on to the next level. And then those who are like, I want to specialize in planting. And it's really cool is the guy on our team, our discipleship pastor, who really carried the bulk of the load in building this out, learning from others and putting it together. By the time we finished it and we get halfway through the first year with the pastor track, he goes, hey, guess what? God's calling me into the planter track. And we're sending him out this year to plant the church. And so really affirming, man. And just even the ideas of that missional leader track early on. But here's my question for this. Boldness to do this. Because I'm just going to speak, and I have members of my church listen to the podcast, they're going to hear this.
Yeah.
I am apprehensive in the confidence of getting somebody from brand new believer, maybe even a needle in their arm 3 years ago, to these other tracks. Tell me the kind of boldness and the steps you had to take in your head, maybe even to get there.
Yeah, I think, part of it is, if you go, I don't get me wrong, I think we need to train guys. They need to be prepared. They need to be competent. We need to do a good job of assessing people.
Yeah.
But I do think sometimes we can overcomplicate it and over course correct.
Yeah.
Sometimes, man, we've all done this. You take a missions trip and you're like, you meet this missionary and he's like, I've planted 60 churches in like 15 years. And you're like, how did you plant 60 churches? And he's like, well, this guy's planting this and this, and of course, some of those are micro churches, some of those are house churches, some of those are, but that's really like, for me, I feel like I don't want to limit how God can use an individual. Because what I believe, I didn't go to seminary. I didn't even graduate with my undergrad. I left college after my junior year. I got married. I took a youth pastor position, and I never went back. And so for me, I don't devalue the education, but I also don't use that as a metric. Like, you don't have to go to seminary to plant churches. You don't have to go to seminary to plant multiplying churches. You don't have to go to seminary to develop leaders, to make disciples. And at the end of the day, what we're doing is we need to create an environment. Because here's what I don't want. I don't want a guy like Derek to go, you know what? Maybe I should go to seminary for 4 years.
Yeah.
That, in my mind, that would be a complete loss. It'd be sideways energy. I'm like, dude, you live in this context. You're already a missionary. Let us teach you theology. Let us help train you. Because by the way, that's what the church should be doing.
That's right.
And so even that's where he's at now. The reason we don't plant with him now is because he needs a couple years to marinate, grow in his theology. And so we gave him and Noah very specific, resources to help develop him in his theology. He's going to be preaching his first sermon on Labor Day weekend. So being patient. I mean, if you think about it, by the time he actually plants, he's probably going to be about 8 years in the process.
Yeah. Right.
And I don't know that everyone's going to take that long, but the reality is that like if you don't start somewhere, and I think that's just what I really want to encourage guys with, is like, you got to start early on, and you just got to decide now that I'm willing to invest the next 5 to 10 years, because then after that, it'll take, by the time Derek's done, he's the first one out, first indigenous guy, he's out, maybe he's 6, 7, 8 years in, but then the next guy's right behind him.
That's right.
And the next guy's right behind him. The next guy's right behind him. So now it starts to be a flywheel for us. And I think this is the thing, man. I mean, we all know this as a church planting network. You know, we can keep trying to tap seminaries. We can keep trying to tap other states and churches and communities. But the reality is that, you know, things I've been challenging the guys in Boston. I mean, there's a few of us now. We've been there for a decade. Well, at what point, man, do you become like a leading thinker, a leading contributor to this ecosystem, giving back to the cooperative program, giving back to Annie, all those, I think it's great, but also like taking responsibility that we also don't, just like we don't need people to pay for all of our stuff all the time, we also don't need people to send us people to plant churches with.
Yeah.
We need to be responsible for raising up people and planting more churches because that's what's sustainable.
It's good.
See, I think sometimes we focus too much on replication, which I think replication's good, but replication's only good if it's paired with sustainability. And sustainability has everything to do with preparation. So we see guys, you know, what I don't want is to push the gas pedal so fast and we're just pumping guys through residency and training, go plant, and miss that what they really need sometimes is to slow down on the front end so that they can go fast on the back end.
Talk about it.
You know, and so, you know, for me, what I've seen so far since I've been in this role as Sin City missionary in Boston, for me, man, I've seen guys now where I'm like, man, we've seen such a lot of success in Boston. We've seen so many churches planted and it's been amazing. And we want to plant a ton more.
Sure.
But there's a part of me that goes, man, if we don't pit stop, I think you and I were talking about this the other night, right?
Yeah.
We're not saying stop. We're saying, dude, you're lapping people. Great. I love it. If you don't get some tires, get a tune-up. Stop just for 30 seconds. I mean, think about how fast a pit stop is, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't stop and get right, you know, get tightened up, fix what's kind of maybe loose or what needs to be tightened or maintained, like, dude, the wheels are coming off. You're gonna throw a rod, the car's gonna explode. So what I'm trying to say is let's stop. And really for us, what I've seen is a real benefit in saying, what if these guys coming in, some of them, you know, we'll get guys that will come in and want to plant a church. They don't have a ton of experience.
Right.
You know, so I don't know like what your guys' experience was. When I was a youth pastor, I showed up at a church and my pastor was like, this is where we keep the mop bucket. That's where the lawnmower's at. These chairs get set up on Wednesday night. They get tore down on Sunday morning. This is when you show up. This is, you know, but he also said, hey, we got a funeral. I want you to preach this funeral. Here's a hospital visit. Here's how you lead communion. Here's how you preach. Here's how you lead Sunday school department. Here's how you, and all those things, they formed me. And what I've seen is if we're not careful, we got guys who are highly gifted and very educated, which are great things, and they have very little experience. I think a telling question for us, and I think something we need to be honest about, is asking this question to people, guys that are wanting to plant a church. Is there someone in your life right now, or that you can give an example of, a lost, not a non-believing person that you have a deep, meaningful relationship with that you are actively pursuing to make a disciple of them? If the answer is no, then what I can categorically tell you is your next step is not planting a church.
Yeah.
Great.
But we do, but
there is a next step.
there is a next step toward church planting.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so that's where I'm saying, man, if we could get this right on the front end, I think it will actually speed things up on the back end.
Wow.
Aaron, you know, when you're sharing that, it just reminded me of a quote from Dahadi, where he oftentimes says, we teach what we know, but we reproduce who we are.
Come on.
And what I'm catching from that is the planters that end up doing the different tracks that they need to plant. One day when they plant, they're gonna say, okay, what did I do? Here's what I know. Here's what I've been through. I did it the hard way. I put the work in. If guys are just being passed through so quick, that's what they're gonna do in their own pathway.
Right.
And so I love what you said. You're saying, hey, I'm thinking about down the road how this thing is going to affect my city. Not just our church plants, but our church plants. They got to do it right too. That's so good, man.
I don't know if you guys
fresh word there.
If you guys have heard this, but I remember the last 10 years, a lot of the guys that church planted churches and were kind of the leaders on the stages everywhere, blowing and going, became like the celebrities at all the conferences. I found this period of time where I'd go and I'd listen to them speak, and they'd all say the same thing. don't do it like I did it.
Wow.
And a lot of those guys have crashed and burned, or no longer around, or have podcasts written about, all that kind of stuff happening. But what I hear you saying is we want to set up a system so a guy can say to the next guy, do it exactly like I did it.
100%.
Do it exactly like this, because we're going to reproduce something that's lasting and sustainable and healthy. And it's not just about this next church planter. It's about the next 10 church planters.
That's right.
So good.
Man, I
That's
love
right.
that. Aaron, man, we got to get you back on soon, because you got something to say, man. It's in you. It's in you. I love that. Just hearing more of your story. But man, I think this is helpful. I think our listeners are going to really gain something from it. I want to help guys get a hold of this stuff. Is this track stuff that you've got, is that something you're willing to share with other people?
Yep. Anything we got, man, we give away. Half of it's stolen from other people, pieced together. We've done what works for us. And so any way we can be a blessing that way, we'll give it away.
Best way to get a hold of you then?
Honestly, you can email me, Aaron@lifecommunitynow.org or acavin@nam.net.
Awesome. Man, I love that. Thank you for putting that out there for the world.
Yeah. Noah, before we wrap this up, I got to throw a bit of a controversial question over here.
Better do it.
Pastor Aaron. Hey, you're in Boston, kind of the New England flow.
Yeah.
Do you still show love to Brady?
Come on, dude. I'm from Detroit.
Yeah.
I'm a Michigan guy. I've been a Brady fan since the beginning.
Okay.
So I'm a New England Patriots fan.
Yep.
But I roll with TB12 to the end.
TB12 to the end, no
on.
matter what jersey he's got.
No matter. I got all three.
Hey,
I got a Michigan, I got a New England, and I got a Tampa Bay.
He put his work in. He brought rings to the
He
city.
doesn't know New England anything else.
Yeah.
He doesn't know it. 20 years and 6 rings. You don't owe New England
He's
anything
good in
else.
any
dude.
street in New England.
That's right.
Just like Tom Brady treating that city well. Hey, God's using you to treat that city well too.
Well, praise God.
Minister, man.
Praise God. I appreciate you guys.
He certainly
Hey, thanks for joining us for this episode of the We Are Send Network podcast. As always, if you want to know more about planting with the Send Network or just anything about what we're about, you can check us out at sendnetwork.com, or you can text the phrase Send Network to 888-123. That's Send Network, 888-123. Until next time, We Are Send Network.
You have been listening to We Are Send Network, a resource of the North American Mission Board. For more information about today's podcast and other relevant resources, visit sendnetwork.com.